I did forget to mention in the video that they have a box set called Genesis Archive 1967 and 1975. I think it's a 4 CD box set, but it's got a lot of really good live material on it, including a complete live performance of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And then on disc 1 and 2, and then disc 3 has some live stuff from earlier than that. But it's pretty worth checking out. I mean, it's a live version of Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. So I didn't review it because it's a box set, essentially 4 CDs, and it's not all live. There's studio stuff on there. But anyways, again, I think it's worth checking out. It's a pretty good listen. But anyways, on to the official other live albums. What's up, people? My name is Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, and today I'm going to be talking about Genesis live albums. Did the studio albums, did my top 10 songs. We're now going to finish up Genesis for now. Might be a reason to come back later. With the live albums, there are 6 officially released ones. If you're not familiar with Genesis live albums, for the most part, they are a band who pretty much tries to replicate what they do in the studio live. With a couple, what I think are interesting exceptions. If you're not a hardcore Genesis fan, maybe the live stuff doesn't have stuff that appeals to you too much. But if you are a hardcore Genesis fan and you haven't heard the live albums, I think there's a couple things that make them stand out. Is one, just they have one in the Peter Gabriel era live album. There's a Hackett era live album. There's a 3 when it was just Collins, the 3 of them, with, of course, Chester Thompson on drums, Daryl Strummer on guitar. And they have one of those, and then they have 4 of the Collins era. But the interesting thing about them is in almost all of them, except really for one of them, they're doing a whole bunch of songs that cover, more than one album. And so it's interesting to hear sort of the instrumentation, how that changes. Sadly, in on one of them, which happens like 2 decades after the albums were made, 3 decades after the albums were made, 2 decades after the albums were made, they still use really horrible drum sounds live. Collins is a big fan of electronic drums. Some of the sounds are absolutely horrible, but I do think all of them, except maybe one, have something interesting to offer just because of the way the instrumentation might slightly change. And if you really know the songs, you're like, okay, that feels a little bit different. Plus, having 2 drummers gives the instrumental sections, because Collins would sing up front for the most part, and then during like the long instrumental sections, Collins would sit behind the kit, and there would be the 2 drummers, him and Thompson, which is some pretty interesting stuff. The other thing that Genesis does that I absolutely love is they do medleys. They have a lot of long songs, and they can't play all their long songs, especially while they want to play material from whatever the most recent album was. So they do medleys. I think the sort of example that persists from like the late 70s on is when they would play In the Cage. When In the Cage was done, that would usually segue into like the instrumental sections of other songs. I think the first tour out when they did it, I think it was just the first time they had a medley within the Cage. I think it was just a Cinema Show with a like riding the scree tease into Cinema Show. They would play just that sort of instrumental solo section with Banks doing his keyboard solo. They eventually added Colony of Slippermen. They eventually added in between Cinema Show and Colony of Slippermen the second half of that Wind and Wuthering, the instrumental track, the Unquiet Slumbers. But I never remember the second half of that name. They would do that part in the middle, and then eventually they did Cinema Show into Duke's Travels, which is pretty interesting. So anyways, but they do that with more than just In the Cage. They do that with a number of songs. So that's interesting. And so I don't think if you've heard these live albums, I think there are reasons to check them out if you consider yourself a Genesis fan. So anyways, that's it. That's all I got to say. One more thing. There is a bootleg album that's out there. I didn't have to seek it out as a bootleg album. I think I actually came across it at like it might have been a Best Buy at some point, but it was definitely maybe like a UCD store, but it wasn't extra expensive. It was like a regular cost of a CD, two CDs, but it was 1970 to 72. I think it's all radio sessions. And I think it's 5 different radio sessions, and it's a bunch of material from early on, including some really early stuff, a bunch of stuff from Trespass, I think some stuff from Nursery Crime. I don't think there's anything from after that. But it's a really good live performances. For the most part, they're like FM radio broadcasts, so the sound is pretty decent. But there's a couple early versions of like Trespass songs, including like a Stagnation that doesn't have that phenomenal keyboard ending, but it just goes on and on with some more extra vocals and then has a whole different ending that wasn't used. So that's interesting. So if you really are hardcore into Genesis and you like, especially Trespass, because I think the bulk of it is from Trespass, though I think there was a musical box on there. Yeah, maybe a couple other Nursery Crime songs. But it's a pretty good release, especially for that Trespass material. But it's called Genesis. I think it's called Genesis Radio Sessions 1970 to 72. I'm not going to review that because it's not an official release. But if you do come across it, I do think it's worth checking out. It's a pretty interesting listen. But anyways, that's it. Let's get on to number 6. Number 6, The Way We Walk, Volume 1, The Shorts. This is a live album that came out in 92. There was a companion piece, The Way We Walk, Volume 2, The Longs. And this is essentially a bunch of short songs from just the last 3 albums, if I'm not mistaken, from the Genesis self-titled album, from Invisible Touch, and then from We Can't Dance. Is that what it's called? No idea what the name of that album is. Yeah, the We Can't Dance album. Just reviewed that, but again, I don't ever listen to those last 2 albums. We Can't Dance, right? Yeah. And so it's a bunch of the shorter live songs from there. Like, looking at the set list alone, I have no interest in this. I have no interest in these studio albums other than the self-titled Genesis. The set list is a healthy mix of all 3 of those albums. It's pretty much just live performances of them. The sound is good. The performances are competent performances. If you like this song, if you like these songs, I can't imagine why you wouldn't like this album. Nothing too crazy goes on other than the last two tracks. There's Tonight, 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 which this from the 92 tour. They were playing a shortened version of that in 92 and then again in 2007. It was about 3.5, 4 minutes. And then that would kind of end and then immediately go into Invisible Touch. So other than that shortened Tonight, Tonight with that kind of interesting segue, it's pretty abrupt into Invisible Touch. It's a pretty straightforward rendering of all these songs. Land of Confusion, No Son of Mine, Jesus He Knows Me, Throwing It All Away, I Can't Dance, Mama, Hold on My Heart, That's All, In Too Deep, Tonight, 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 Invisible Touch. Again, nothing I really want to listen to. This is, for both these tours, from 4 of these albums. It's the 3 of them, Collins, Banks, and Rutherford, with Daryl Sturmer on bass guitar and guitar. They would switch depending on the song, and then Chester Thompson on percussion and drums. So anyways, I don't ever listen to this album. If you like the songs, they're okay. They're renditions of these songs. They're live. The band puts forth some good energy. You can't complain about the energy. They're a good live band. They're not phoning it in, even though the arrangements aren't really all that spectacular. But yeah, number 6, The Way We Walk, Volume 1, The Shorts. Number 5, The Way We Walk, Volume 2, The Longs. This came out a couple months after the first one, The Shorts. This came out in early 93. Also material, I think all of this is from 92. I don't think there's anything from the earlier tracks. And again, from the earlier tour, though there are things from the earlier albums. These are the long songs that they would play. The shortest one on here is 6 minutes long, and that's a drum duet. Other than the drum duet, the shortest one is 10 minutes and 18 seconds. Going to talk about the first track last. The last 5 tracks are Driving the Last Spike, Domino, Fading Lights, Home by the Sea, Second Home by the Sea, drum duet. The only one of these that I kind of really like is the Home by the Sea, second Home by the Sea, especially the second Home by the Sea. There's a little guitar part in there. I think Sturmer's playing it live. I'm not sure, but it's kind of a little more extended out than it is in the studio version. They're still using some pretty awful sounding electronic drums in Second Home by the Sea. And I actually think they're using a worse sounding electronic drum than the horrible sounding one on the album, which I've gotten used to over the years. But there are some interesting moments in the Second Home by the Sea. I think it's because of the two drummer effect. And I think the two drummer effect is giving some of the parts a little bit of a, I guess funky would be the word, a little bit of a funkier vibe. So if you are a fan of Second Home by the Sea, I think this is worth checking out because it has a slightly different flavor. Again, they're not mixing it up a lot. It's essentially the same song, but parts of it feel a little bit different. But the first track is a 19-minute medley of a whole bunch of songs. And I don't think this works as well as what they did on previous tours because really it's a 20-minute chunk where they're like, okay, let's see how many songs we can get out of the way in 20 minutes. And yes, they make some good choices. There are some good decisions in here, but I don't think it is as inspired as things they have done on previous tours or even things that they would do 15 years later on the Europe tour, which will be on this list. Yeah, so what you get in this, they call it the old medley, so they're really, really being creative with this. Opens up with Dance on a Volcano. Again, you don't get the crazy King Crimson-ish jam in that. That goes into Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. They keep the segue into the musical box that they did on the Seconds Out tour, though I don't think it's all of Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I think they cut out the middle bridge part. I think it's a shortened version of Lamb. I might be wrong on that. Correct me if I am. Into the closing section of Musical Box, which is phenomenal. Phil does a good job of that. When that ends, they immediately jump into the solo section of Firth of Fifth. When that solo section ends, they go into I Know What I Like. And the I Know What I Like is pretty good. It's not as funky as the Seconds Out version, which is phenomenal, but that's not bad. And then at the end of I Know What I Like, they reference a whole bunch of songs. I think they reference Follow You, Follow Me is thrown in there. I think That's All might be thrown in there. But there's a whole bunch of things they're like touching in their catalog throughout that. So it's an interesting listen. It's kind of fun to hear all this stuff back to back to back, but I do think it's not as creative or just not as inspiring as some of the stuff they did on other tours. But it's worth checking out once, I think, if you're a Genesis fan. So anyways, that's that album. Number 5, The Way We Walk, Volume 2, The Longs. Number 4, Live Over Europe 2007. I was not planning on reviewing the live albums, but I had completely forgotten about the existence of this album. But Paul Ayers made a comment right there talking about this album in particular. I was like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that album. I went back and listened to it, and I actually really, really like it. It is a 2-disc set. It is essentially a set list from the tour. If you had gone to some of the shows, this is the exact set list you would have seen. There's one song on here which wasn't at a lot of the shows, but they included it on here because it popped up on a couple shows. But for the most part, this is what a show from that tour would have been like in order, song for song. It's like over 2 hours, so you're getting a good, healthy, it's all over the map as far as stuff that they play. This is another instance where it's 2007. Some of the songs are definitely slowed down. I think they even dropped they're played in a lower register for Phil Collins' voice, or, played so Phil Collins his singing voice is not as strong as it was. So I think they made some accommodations. And so some of the songs feel slower, but then also some of them feel really good. And again, the 2 drummer effect really adds to a lot of the music, but it's a pretty good set list. And really, the only reason it's not ranked higher is because they are still representing We Can't Dance and Invisible Touch, which are albums I just kind of don't like. And the songs they're playing on these are kind of songs I don't need to hear it over and over again. But the set list, disc one, Duke's intro, which is like behind the lines, part of that, into like part of Duke's and kind of this Duke's really quick, short and medley. It's like almost 4 minutes long. And it feels like just this great, grand introduction. And yeah, it's kind of disappointing. Like the first time I heard it, like realizing they're not going to go into a full behind the lines. There's not going to be any vocals. We're not going to get a Duchess. But it serves, it is a great opening number. And then that goes into Turn It On Again, which is a great second song, especially since Turn It On Again was usually like an encore number, for the previous tours. So it's nice to hear that early. This one feels a little bit slowed down, but also it's still that it's funky. The weird time signature, and I think it's the verses, is phenomenal on this. Love it. Very minor, but it's good song. It's one of those songs where every time I see it on a set list, I'm like, oh, Turn It On Again. I don't ever need to hear that again. But then when I get into it, I'm like, yeah, it's a pretty good song. Then we get No Son of Mine, which does nothing for me at all. Land of Confusion. Again, I just don't need to hear that live. But then we get an In the Cage, which also feels much less frenetic than the Three Sides live version, which is like, for me, the holy grail of Genesis as far as release stuff. So you get it's still a good In the Cage, but it does feel a little more slowed down and not as frenetic. That goes into Cinema Show with a little Riding the Scree Tees. And then they make a kind of weird, not as smooth as when they go into Colony of Superman, or even as like makes sense as when they go into that second half of whatever Unquiet Summers is. I need to look that up. I'm sorry, I keep not. But that's not released, that version. It was played on the Mama Tour, I think is when it was, and just one of the greatest moments ever. But anyways, Distraction, In the Cage, into the big Cinema Show jam, into Duke's Travels, which is pretty sweet. And so this whole thing is like almost 14 minutes long. And then Duke's Travels, right when it's about to wrap up and, cut off and jump back into Duke's End, they go into Afterglow. And again, the transition into Afterglow is not as perfect as I say it is on that Three Sides live version. But it's still a pretty nice segue. And then we get a pretty nice Afterglow. Then we get Hold on My Heart. We get Home by the Sea into Second Home by the Sea. Again, Second Home by the Sea sounds a little bit different, sounds pretty interesting. There's some nice textures just because of the drum work. I think the guitar solo is extended a little bit. I might be mistaken this Second Home by the Sea and the last one. I know this one for sure has that kind of extended guitar thing. I think the previous one does too. Then we get a Follow You, Follow Me. This is the song that wasn't in every set list. It's kind of thrown in here that was played every once in a while. We get Firtha Fifth, just the solo part, the same part that appears on the Longs in that medley. And then we get an I Know What I Like, which is nice and extended. There's even a Stagnation jam at the end of this. It is definitely not as loose and free and funky as the Seconds Out version, but it's still a good version. That's disc one. Disc two, we get a Mama. I think the studio Mama's better than this. I think those Abacab tour Mamas are better than this. Not the Abacab tour, the Genesis tour Mamas are better than this, but it's still a pretty good Mama. We get a Ripples, which is a really nice, that's a good choice, songs to play. Throwing It All Away, which I can do without. A Domino, both parts. Okay, a drum duet called Conversation with Two Stools, which goes into Los Endos, which is a really nice segue. That's a nice yes. Then we get that Tonight part that goes into Invisible Touch. Then we get an I Can't Dance, and then we get the Carpet Crawlers as a closing number, which is interesting. I think the first disc is much stronger than the second disc, but it's not a bad listen, man. And I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it and how much the old stuff sounded pretty good, even though it was slightly modified to accommodate for decades of time passage. But yeah, number 4, Live Over Europe, 2007. And thank you for the inspiration to make me go back and listen to this, Mr. Ayers. All right, on to number 3. Number 3 is Genesis Live, their very first live album. This came out way back in 1973. This came out right after the Foxtrot album. I think this was the Foxtrot tour, if I'm not mistaken. So this is sort of the iconic 5 lineup with Hackett and Collins in the band. It's only 5 songs. And I put it after the other two because the other two are both like double LPs. They have more songs. They have older songs, and they also have like segues and interesting medleys. Plus, Seconds Out as Supper's Ready, and I know Supper's Ready was played on this tour, so maybe this should have been a double CD. Also, that probably would not have made any sense at this point in their career. I do believe there is a I have the single CD. It was one of the first CDs I was ever given. I think I got it as a Christmas present right after we got a CD player. It was like one of the first CDs like Genesis released. And it took me a long time. It took me a couple years to get into that because I was into Abacab at that point. I was getting into like, I think Genesis, the album had just come out, was about to come out. So I was getting into that. I was going back and listening to Duke. And this was just like, it took me a while to like wrap my head around everything that was going. I liked Watcher of the Skies. I liked The Knife, the opening and closing, but the stuff in the middle was too convoluted English proggy for my like preteen brain to comprehend. So it took me a while to get into this. Once I got into this, I really enjoyed it. But it's pretty much really good, high energy, solid performances of early Genesis songs. Side one, Watcher of the Skies, Get 'Em Out by Friday, The Return of the Giant Hogweed. Side two, The Musical Box, The Knife. Pretty straightforward. Sounds good. Energy's good. Performances are good. Hackett in particular sounds good. They all sound amazing. But yeah, that's it. I think if I was going to listen, this is a live album where if a choice between this live album or the studio album, I think I'd rather listen to Trespass or Nursery Crime or Foxtrot over this, just because I also like those other songs that are on those albums. So yeah, this is one of those that I definitely think is a better album than the first three I did. But it is something that, I don't know, I just don't go to back down that much, even though I recognize it is a good, solid live performance. There was a re-release of this, and they had extra tracks from 75. I never bought that re-release. Though there's a Back in New York City, Fly on a Windshield, the Broadway Melody of 1974. That's probably fantastic. And Anyway, and the Chamber of 32 Doors. And I can't speak about that. I know I listened to it. I know I've heard it, but I don't own it. So I wasn't able to check it out. But anyways, it does exist. But anyways, the original Genesis Live, it's my number 3. Number 2, Seconds Out. This came out in 1977. 2 discs, 2 sides, 2 LPs. Most of it came from the Wind and the Wuthering tour. There was 1 track, The Cinema Show, from the previous Trick of the Tail tour. Bruford is the drummer on the Trick of the Tail tour. Chester Thompson is the drummer for Wind and Wuthering and everything else. No Sturmer, so it's just 4 of them at this point. So Phil could come up front and sing during the parts where Phil had to come up and sing. And then you had the Chester Thompson and or Bruford holding down the drums. Yeah, I own this on cassette. I bought it at the Licorice Pizza on Brookhurst and Adams in Huntington Beach. When I was 16, I had a summer job working for a law firm. I delivered papers. I filed court documents. I don't know if I was allowed to serve people, but I know I brought people papers and did all that stuff. But essentially I would show up at the law firm in the morning. They would give me like a bunch of stuff I had to like drive around Southern California to do. And so I had a lot of free time because I didn't have to be back till a certain time. And the lawyers were really generous tippers. They were really nice people, and sometimes they'd be like, hey man, if you're back around this area around noon, will you bring me lunch? And they'd always give me like $20, $40. And then I would immediately go to a record store and buy something. And so I remember I bought Seconds Out on the double cassettes. I can still remember walking to the car, opening it, and putting it in the first cassette. Absolutely love this. Again, these are the songs that are on it. You get a Squonk, Carpet Crawlers, Robbery, Assault and Battery, Afterglow to open up. Really good version of Afterglow. Really good version of Squonk. There's a lot of muscle in Squonk on this. I like this version of Squonk. Side 2, Firth the Fifth. No piano intro. It just starts off, the path is clear, or whatever that first line is. I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe. One of my favorite things ever. It's like 8.5 minutes long. Starts off all funky and stuff. They quote a whole bunch of stuff at the end. There's a really nice stagnation jam. One of my favorite live things ever. So much better than the studio track. If you've only heard the studio track and you like this song, you must check out this version. I think this was mostly played towards the end of the set, along with Lamb Lies Down on Broadway in the musical box. So, other than it being out of order, most of this I think is in the order things would be played in, but except for this side, which I think the songs were kind of jumped up to make a better album or something. Side 3 is Supper's Ready, a version of Supper's Ready, which is a pretty good performance, but the dynamic nature of the sounds is lost in the live version simply because they're not using all this wider array of instruments. They're not using the studio like they do on the album version. They do a good job of like getting all the parts down, and the Apocalypse in 9/8 is particularly good. But it's a good performance, but I think it somewhat pales to the studio version, the Foxtrot version. And then side 4 is the Cinema Show, the one song that is Bruford. That middle jam is ridiculously, it sounds amazing. I think in Cinema Show, if I'm not mistaken, I know they did this on later tours. Right when they would start off Cinema Show, it would only be the 3 of them playing. Like Collins would sit in on drums, Rutherford and Banks, and Thompson wouldn't play, or in this instant, Bruford wouldn't play for like a while, just so it would be a moment where it's just Genesis. It's just the 3 of us. And then Bruford comes in and they finish out strong. I know they did that on later tours. I also think they do that for like 30 seconds to a minute here, but I might be wrong. It just might be me not picking up the 2 drums. And then they close out with Dance on a Volcano into Los Endos to close out. So yeah, man. And again, you're not getting that crazy jam and Dance on a Volcano. But anyways, good, great, awesome, good performances. For me, side 2, I think, is the highlight of this, with the Firth of Fifth, the amazing I Know What I Like, and the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway into the musical box, that closing section. That is a really good part of this. But for the most part, I think this is a pretty good CD. It's a pretty good live thing. So anyways, yeah, all right, that's it. On to number 1. And number 1, Three Sides Live, one of my favorite albums of all time. I just love this, mainly because I will listen to the In the Cage on this over and over and over again. I think the In the Cage, which goes into, again, a little short tease of Ride in the Scree, it is brief, but it is there, into Cinema Show, into the jam of Colony of Superman, into an absolutely beautiful Afterglow. With that double More Trouble Every Day drum outro thrown in at the very end. Oh, it is so beautiful. I only had the 3 sides live version. There is a 4 sides live version that has additional live tracks, but this is all from the Abacab tour, right? So this came out in 82. The tour was, I think, 81, right? Only in 81. But yeah, so it's all mostly stuff from there, with really, it's only the 4 sides live stuff that has kind of old stuff thrown in, other than the In the Cage medley and Afterglow. Most of it's recent stuff, but it all sounds good, and it's just the best of the recent stuff. So side 1, Turn It On Again, Dodo Lurker, Abacab. It is kind of weird in that in this, for this tour, Behind the Lines into Duchess was the opener for the most part, and then they would go into Dodo Lurker, Abacab. Turn It On Again was usually an encore. So it is interesting how they put Turn It On Again as the opening track, then you get a Dodo Lurker, and then an Abacab. Turn It On Again just has good live energy. Dodo Lurker is pretty much like the Abacab version. Abacab has that extended jam at the end, so when it fades out on the studio album, that keeps going, and there's a couple more minutes that are pretty sweet, pretty nice. You get a little, that full solo that gets dropped in there is really nice. Love that version. The beginning is better. They kind of vamp a little in the beginning before they go into the actual song. Oh man, just really good live version. Side 2, Behind the Lines into Duchess, Me and Sarah Jane, one of my favorite things of Genesis is particularly this live version of this song. And then Follow You, Follow Me, which, okay, not a bad song. Side 3, Misunderstanding. Again, a lot of people thought this or Follow You, Follow Me was or maybe Your Own Special Way. Again, another ballad that showed them going in the wrong direction for a lot of early Genesis prog fans. I like Misunderstanding. I like that slow do 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 boom 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 boom, that drawn out riff that kind of runs through the whole thing. I don't mind this song. Then one of the best things ever released ever in the history of live music, In the Cage. A phenomenal version of In the Cage. The energy is absolutely fantastic. It just builds and builds and builds. The performance is good. I think Phil Collins does a fantastic job. Into the whole medley with Cinema Show, Slipperman. Amazing. The drum work on this is fantastic. It is just such a great performance. And then just an effortless like slide into the sort of forlorn, the sort of heartbroken, the sort of like of afterglow, which Collins just performs beautifully. That is the end of the third side live. The version I had 5 studio tracks. Paper Late, which is kind of a no reply at all with horns number. You Might Recall, which I honestly, an okay number. Me and Virgil, which is a really good song, kind of a story song, got a nice little break in it. I like that song. Evidence of Autumn and Open Door, which are 2 kind of typical this era slower numbers. Okay. I do think Paper Late's fun. I do think Me and Virgil is an excellent song. Those are kind of worth checking out. But they're not live, so I'm not either going to credit this album with them or detract from this album. But if you happen to find the one that has 4 sides live, which I think was a European release, it has One for the Vine from the 80 tour, Fountain of Salmakis from the 78 tour. 78 tour, is that right? Not sure that's right, but must be right. But there's a Fountain of Salmakis from Hackett's last tour. And then there's an It, Watcher of the Skies. I think I said Watcher of the Skies into It on a video. It's It into Watcher of the Skies. And that's a nice, the way It kind of ends and the Watcher of the Skies kind of creeps up. And it's a nice ending from a 76 show. So that would be with Bruford on drums, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so Bruford's on drums in that. So yeah, it's pretty, yeah. And, I guess it is a 78 tour, but Hackett's not in it on that Fountain of Salmakis. Yeah, so there we go. Yeah, Hackett's only on the It Watcher of the Skies thing. So anyways, those, if you get that 4-side live, those are some really good live songs to be included on there. But either way, the first 3 sides, the 3 sides live, as the title says, I think are really good. It's a band. Again, they are what they are. If you don't like the songs, you're not going to like the album. If you like these songs, I think there's a good live energy to all of them. And it's a good album. I listen to this album a lot, mainly because I will listen to that In the Cage over and over and over and over again. So yeah. And I know since we're doing this on YouTube and you all have access to YouTube, there is a live version of this from the Mama tour, which is the Genesis self-titled tour, but it's In the Cage. You get the transition into a Cinema Show, but you get that Wind and Weather in the second half of the Unquiet Summers, that da-na-na, that really hard jam in there. Ridiculously good. Then that goes into Slipperman, and Rutherford's bass playing on the Slipperman is fantastic. And then there's an afterglow, and you can kind of, the video's okay, the sound is pretty good, but it's definitely worth watching. But it's a phenomenal performance. But anyways, that is number 1, 3 sides live. That's it for Genesis live videos. Thank you, Mr. Ayers, for inspiring me to do this. I do think videos, albums for live albums, I do think 4 of them are worth checking out if you're a Genesis fan, just because they're not bringing a whole lot of different stuff, but there's enough little minor tweaks to make it worth watching. But let me know if you have listened to these, what your thoughts on them, why I'm wrong, why I'm right, what I messed up on, all that stuff. I'm sure I made mistakes. I always do. But anyways, comment, subscribe, like, share. Go listen to some Genesis and make your day that much better. Thanks for watching, y'all. Peace. And yeah, see you again later. Bye.